On a cold December night in 1773, some people awoke to a big chaos by the Boston harbor. Many people came to see what was happening. Some people looked out their window to see that there was a ruckus on the ships the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. Native Americans, they thought. But as they looked a little closer, they saw them. The colonists standing with the Sons of Liberty. People wondered what they were doing. Then they saw the men heaving boxes overboard. They wondered why, because the boxes looked heavy, very heavy. But then people looked a little bit closer and they saw what they were doing. The boxes were filled with pounds and pounds of tea. Then a lot of people ran out their houses and cheered with the rest of the crowd. They knew why the boxes were being thrown. They were taking a stand. So, who were the Sons of Liberty? What provoked them into dumping tea into the harbor? Who were they taking a stand against? What were the events leading up to this incident called the Boston Tea Party? Well, to answer these questions, we have to go back to when it all started. To answer these questions, we have to go back to the time period, the end of the French and Indian War. England had won, and there was a time for celebrating that this dark period was over. At least for a little while. But it had happened that the war had lasted 7 years, and England had some empty pockets because of the war, and they were in deep debt. They needed something to get them more money and to repay their debts and to restore their treasury. The British Parliament decided the best solution was to tax the colonists in America. They thought that the colonists benefited the most from the war, and that the fact that they were the most prosperous people in the known world, that they could afford it. The colonists, however, did not think that was at all fair. They were furious that they could not have a say in the decisions that Parliament were thinking about. The colonists tried to express their feelings with peaceful protests and petitions. They chanted, "No taxation without representation," meaning they shouldn't tax them without having a voice for the colonists. Before they went to such drastic measures like the dumping of the tea, the colonists attempted to get their message across in other ways. One way is that they tried keeping the tea from being loaded off of the boats. Mr. Roch, a man who owned one of the boats called the Dartmouth, was in between a rock and a very hard place. The colonists wanted him to bring the tea back to England, but the governor wanted him to unload it into the colonies. If he unloaded it, then he would have the colonists to deal with. But if he did not unload it, then he would be in big trouble with the governor. He also had another problem because he could not make money with the tea still on board. In one of the colonists' petitions, they tried sending a message to Britain by making a tea salesman quit his job. But ultimately, that did not work. The attempts of the colonists ended up being in vain because England did not listen to them. Eventually, the colonists got so sick of the taxation without representation that in one protest they ended up at the Boston harbor, and they split into groups and they dumped all of the tea off the boats as much as they could. They made no extra harm to the ships. They were feeling sympathy for the owners who had nothing to do with their predicament. This was just one stepping block that led to the Revolutionary War that made America its own country. So, when the British ignored the colonists, they passed the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act taxed newspapers, legal documents, and even playing cards. The Tea Act was passed by Parliament on May 10th, 1773. It granted the British East India Company tea a monopoly on tea sales in American colonies. The colonists, at first, did not want to be violent, and they tried to solve the conflict peacefully. They tried petitions and boycotts, and even they tried to stop the tea from being unloaded. But Parliament did not want to listen. So they went on a riot, and it ended up as the Boston Tea Party. This was the major stepping block to the Revolutionary War. It showed Britain that the colonists were not playing around. They meant business. The Boston Tea Party was a major stepping block in American history. It started the path to the rich and independent country that it is today.
All rights reserved to Vivienne Uzamere. Any unauthorized publication without the creator's consent is very mean after she obviously told you not to.